Jake Martinez knelt beside a wounded child on the dusty ground of Kepler 442b. The little girl had cuts all over her arms and legs from the bombing that happened 3 hours ago. Jake pressed a clean bandage against the worst cut on her shoulder, while her mother held her hand and whispered soft words in their native language. "You're going to be okay," Jake said to the child, even though she probably could not understand English. His voice was calm and gentle, like it always was when he worked on patients. He had been a combat medic for the Earth Defense Corps for 6 years now, and he knew that a peaceful voice could heal almost as much as medicine could. The refugee camp on this moon was supposed to be safe. The war between Earth and the Zephyrian Empire was happening in other parts of the galaxy far away from here. But somehow the aliens had found this place where thousands of people from different worlds had come to escape the fighting. Now the camp was full of smoke and broken buildings and scared families. Jake finished wrapping the girl's wounds and gave her mother some pills for the pain. He stood up and looked around at all the other people who needed help. His medical bag felt heavy on his shoulder, but he was not tired yet. There were still dozens of injured people waiting for treatment, and Jake would not stop until every single one of them was taken care of. The sound of engines roaring overhead made everyone look up at the sky. Jake saw 3 large ships with dark metal hulls coming down toward the camp. These were not Earth ships. The design was all wrong, with too many sharp edges and strange symbols painted on the sides in bright red. These were Zephyrian warships, and they were landing right here in the middle of the camp. "Everyone get to the shelters," Jake shouted as loud as he could. People started running in all directions, carrying their children and whatever belongings they could grab quickly. Jake helped an old man who could not walk very fast get to his feet and pointed him toward the nearest bunker. The ships landed with loud crashes that shook the ground and made dust fly everywhere. Heavy metal doors opened and alien soldiers poured out, wearing black armor that covered their entire bodies. The Zephyrians were tall and thin, with gray skin and long fingers that ended in sharp claws. Their faces were hidden behind helmets, but Jake could see their glowing yellow eyes through the dark glass. Jake kept working on the wounded people even as the alien soldiers spread out through the camp. He was not going to abandon his patients, no matter what happened. A woman with a broken leg could not run to the shelters, so Jake stayed with her and kept applying pressure to stop the bleeding from where a piece of metal had cut her. "Human medic," a voice said behind him in heavily accented English. Jake turned around and saw a Zephyrian soldier pointing a weapon at him. The alien was bigger than the others and had more decorations on his armor, which probably meant he was an officer. "I'm treating wounded civilians," Jake said without moving his hands away from his patient. "They need medical attention." The Zephyrian officer tilted his head like he was confused by Jake's words. "You will come with us now. Let me finish helping. These people first. They're not soldiers. They're just families trying to survive?" The alien made a sound that might have been laughter, but it was not a happy sound. "Humans always think they can negotiate. You have no choice in this matter." 2 more Zephyrian soldiers came up behind Jake and grabbed his arms. He did not fight them because he knew it would not help and might make things worse for the people in the camp. But he did call out to another medic who was hiding behind an overturned vehicle. "Lisa, take care of the woman with the broken leg. Keep pressure on the wound and give her the blue pills for infection." The female medic nodded and ran over to take Jake's place. Jake felt a little better knowing that someone would continue his work even though he was being taken away. The Zephyrians dragged Jake toward their ship. As they walked, he could see other alien soldiers rounding up some of the refugees and loading them into metal cages. Most of the people had escaped to the underground shelters, but a few dozen had been caught. Jake's heart felt heavy knowing that these innocent people were being taken prisoner for no good reason. Inside the Zephyrian warship, everything was dark metal and blinking lights. The corridors were narrow and cold, and the air smelled like chemicals. Jake was pushed along until they reached a small room with no windows. The door slammed shut behind him, and he heard the sound of locks clicking into place. Jake sat down on the hard metal bench that was the only furniture in the cell. He checked his medical bag and was surprised that the aliens had let him keep it. Maybe they thought human medicine was too primitive to be dangerous. His supplies were limited, but he still had bandages, antiseptic, pain medication, and a few other basic items. Hours passed, and Jake could feel the ship moving as it left the moon's surface. He wondered where they were taking him and what they planned to do with the other prisoners. The Zephyrians were known for being cruel to their captives. Some humans who had been rescued from their ships told horrible stories about torture and forced labor. The door to Jake's cell opened and a Zephyrian officer walked in. This one was different from the soldiers who had captured him. She was taller and her armor was decorated with gold markings. Her helmet was off, revealing a face with sharp features and eyes that glowed like yellow fire. "I am Commander Vextara," she said in perfect English. "You are the human medic who refused to abandon the wounded during our raid." Jake stood up and met her gaze without showing fear. "That's right. It's my job to help people who are hurt." The commander walked around him slowly, like she was studying an interesting specimen. "Your species is weak and soft. You waste time and resources on those who cannot fight. This is why humans will never defeat the Zephyrian Empire." "Maybe," Jake said quietly. "But at least we try to save lives instead of just taking them." Commander Vextara stopped walking and stared at him with those burning yellow eyes. Jake could tell that his words had made her angry, but he was not going to apologize for speaking the truth. "We shall see how brave you are," she said with a cold smile that showed rows of sharp teeth. "I have something special planned for you. Human medic. Something that will show your people exactly how weak and pathetic you really are." The commander turned and walked out of the cell. The door slammed shut again, and Jake was alone with a growing feeling that whatever the aliens had planned for him was going to be very bad indeed. Jake had been locked in the small cell for 2 days when the Zephyrian guards came for him. He had tried to sleep, but the metal bench was uncomfortable, and the ship made strange noises that kept him awake. His medical bag sat beside him, and he had checked the supplies inside at least 20 times, just to keep his mind busy. The door opened with a loud clang, and 3 alien soldiers stepped inside. They were wearing full armor and carrying weapons that hummed with electrical energy. One of them gestured for Jake to stand up with the barrel of his gun. "Time to go, human," the soldier said in broken English. "Commander wants to see you." Jake picked up his medical bag and followed the guards through the dark corridors of the ship. They passed other cells where he could hear voices speaking in different languages. Some of the prisoners from the refugee camp were still alive, but Jake could not see them through the solid metal doors. They walked for several minutes until they reached a large room with high ceilings and bright lights. Commander Vextara was standing in the center with several other Zephyrian officers around her. Along one wall was a massive window that looked out into space where Jake could see stars and distant planets. But what caught Jake's attention was not the view or the aliens. It was the enormous cage that took up half the room. The bars were thick as his arm and made of some kind of metal that seemed to glow with its own light. Inside the cage was darkness, and Jake could not see what was hidden in the shadows. "Welcome to our entertainment deck," Commander Vextara said with that cold smile of hers. "This is where we keep our most dangerous prisoner." She walked over to a control panel and pressed several buttons. Lights came on inside the cage, and Jake could finally see what was in there. His breath caught in his throat and his heart started beating faster. The creature inside the cage was huge. It stood at least 12 feet tall, and its body was covered in black scales that looked harder than armor. It had 6 arms that ended in claws as long as kitchen knives, and its head was shaped like a valve's but with teeth that could bite through steel. Glowing red eyes stared out from the darkness, and Jake could hear it breathing with a sound like steam escaping from a pipe. "This is Kraithus," the commander said proudly. "It comes from a world called Mortis Prime, where everything is designed to kill. We captured it after it destroyed one of our colonies and killed 300 of our soldiers. Even our bravest warriors are afraid to go near it." The creature moved closer to the bars, and Jake could see that it was even bigger than he had first thought. Its muscles rippled under the black scales, and when it opened its mouth, Jake could see rows and rows of sharp teeth. This was definitely the most dangerous thing he had ever seen in his life. We have tried many different punishments on this beast, Commander Vexthara continued. We have starved it and beaten it and shocked it with electricity. But it refuses to submit to us. It just gets angrier and more violent. Jake watched the creature and noticed something that the Zephyrians seemed to have missed. The way Kraithus was standing was not quite right. It was favoring its left side, and its breathing sounded labored, like it was having trouble getting enough air. These were signs that Jake recognized from his medical training. The creature was injured and probably in pain. "Why are you telling me this?" Jake asked without taking his eyes off the beast. "Because you are going to be its next meal," the commander said, and her officers laughed at what they thought was a good joke. "We are tired of feeding it our own food. Human flesh will make a nice change for its diet." The guards grabbed Jake's arms and started dragging him toward a smaller door that led directly into the cage. Jake did not fight them because he knew it would be useless, but his mind was working fast, trying to figure out what to do. The creature was definitely dangerous, but it was also hurt, and that changed everything. "Wait," Jake said as they reached the door. "Can I ask you something?" "Commander." Vexthara held up her hand, and the guards stopped moving. "What could you possibly have to say that would interest me? How long has it been since you fed that thing?" Jake pointed at Kraithus, who was now standing right at the bars watching them with those burning red eyes. 3 days, one of the officers answered. "We wanted it to be extra hungry for you." Jake nodded like he understood. "And when was the last time anyone treated its injuries?" The aliens looked confused by the question. "What injuries?" the commander asked. "Look at how it's standing. See how it keeps its weight off the left side. And listen to its breathing. That's not normal. The creature is hurt and probably has infections from wounds that haven't been cleaned properly." Commander Vexthara walked closer to the cage and stared at Kraithus for a long moment. "Even if that were true, why would it matter? The beast deserves to suffer for what it did to our people." "Because a wounded animal is unpredictable," Jake explained. "It might be so weak from infection that it can't even eat properly." "You might throw me in there and nothing interesting will happen because it's too sick to fight." The commander's eyes narrowed as she considered his words. Jake could tell that she was the kind of person who wanted her entertainment to be exciting and dramatic. A slow death from starvation would not be nearly as fun to watch as a violent battle. "What are you suggesting, human?" "Let me treat its wounds first. Give it some food and water and let it recover its strength. Then, when you throw me in there, it will be healthy enough to give you a real show." The other Zephyrian officers started talking among themselves in their own language. Jake could not understand the words, but he could tell they were debating his suggestion. Some of them seemed to think it was a good idea, while others were suspicious of his motives. "You would heal this creature knowing that it will try to kill you afterward?" Commander Vexthara asked. "I'm a medic," Jake said simply. "It's what I do. I help anyone who needs medical attention regardless of whether they're friend or enemy." The commander stared at him for a long time like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Finally, she nodded to her officers. "Very well, we will give you 1 day to treat the beast's injuries, but you will do it from outside the cage. If you try any tricks, we will shoot you and throw your body inside anyway." The guards let go of Jake's arms, and he walked over to examine Kraithus more carefully. The creature watched him approach, but did not make any threatening moves. Up close, Jake could see infected wounds along its flank, where Zephyrian weapons had burned through the scales. There were also signs of dehydration and malnutrition. "I'm going to need clean water, antiseptic solution, and some kind of long-handled tools to reach through the bars," Jake told the commander. "Also food for the creature and something to make bandages from." "You will get what you need," she replied. "But remember, human, this is only delaying your death by 1 day. Tomorrow you will go into that cage, and we will see how much your compassion is worth when you are fighting for your life." Jake nodded and opened his medical bag to see what supplies he had available. He knew that the Zephyrians expected him to die tomorrow, but he was not going to give up hope. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could change everything, and Jake had learned never to underestimate the power of healing. even if it meant helping the very creature that was supposed to kill him. Jake spent the entire night working on Kraithus through the bars of the cage. The Zephyrians had brought him the supplies he requested, but they watched everything he did with suspicious eyes. Commander Vexthara stood nearby for hours making. Sure, he did not try to escape or damage their prized prisoner. The creature had been wary of Jake at first. When he approached the cage with a long metal rod that had antiseptic sloth wrapped around the end, Kraithus had backed away and made a low, growling sound that vibrated through the floor. But Jake moved slowly and kept talking in a calm voice, even though he knew the beast could not understand his words. "Easy there, big guy," Jake said softly as he cleaned the infected wounds on the creature's left side. "I know this stings, but it needs to be done. These cuts are full of bacteria and they're making you sick." Kraithus stood perfectly still while Jake worked, but its red eyes never left his face. The creature seemed to be studying him with an intelligence. That surprised Jake. This was not just a mindless monster like the Zephyrians believed. There was something aware and thinking behind those glowing eyes. The wounds were worse than Jake had initially thought. The Zephyrian weapons had burned deep into the creature's flesh, and the injuries had been left untreated for weeks. The cuts were infected so badly that green pus oozed out when Jake cleaned them. It was amazing that Kraithus was still alive at all. "How long have you had this creature imprisoned?" Jake asked Commander Vexthara as he applied antibiotic ointment to a particularly nasty wound. 6 weeks, she replied. "We captured it during the battle for Colony 7. It took 50 of our soldiers and 2 gunships to bring it down." Jake could see why. Even injured and malnourished, Kraithus was an impressive specimen. Its muscles were dense and powerful, and its claws looked sharp enough to cut through metal. But what struck Jake most was the creature's behavior. It could have easily grabbed him through the bars and crushed him, but instead it allowed him to treat its wounds without resistance. "Has it tried to escape?" Jake asked as he moved on to cleaning cuts on the creature's arms. "Many times," one of the other officers answered. "It nearly broke through the cage walls twice before we installed the electrical barriers." Jake noticed the burn marks on Kraithus' scales where the electrical shocks had hit it. The Zephyrians had been torturing their prisoner with pain whenever it tried to break free. No wonder the creature was so aggressive and hostile. It was fighting for its life against captors who showed it no mercy. As the hours passed, Jake began to notice changes in Kraithus' behavior. The creature started moving closer to the bars when Jake approached instead of backing away. It even extended its wounded limbs toward him to make the treatment easier. Most surprising of all, it began making soft rumbling sounds that almost seemed like purring when Jake worked on areas that were particularly painful. "This is fascinating," Dr. Zellman, the ship's science officer, said as he watched through his recording equipment. "The creature's stress hormones are decreasing significantly. Its heart rate has slowed, and its breathing is becoming more regular." Commander Vexthara frowned at this information. "What does that mean?" "It means the beast is becoming calmer and less aggressive. The human's treatment is having a psychological effect as well as a physical one." Jake heard this conversation, but he kept working without comment. He had suspected that Kraithus was responding to more than just medical treatment. The creature seemed to understand that Jake was trying to help it rather than cause more pain. This kind of recognition required a level of intelligence that most people did not expect from alien predators. When morning came, Jake had finished cleaning and bandaging all of the creature's wounds. Kraithus looked much better already. Its breathing was easier, and it was standing straighter without favoring its injured side. The infected cuts were no longer leaking pus, and the antibiotic ointment seemed to be working well. "Time for feeding," Commander Vexthara announced. "Then we will see how grateful your patient is when it tears you apart." The guards brought several large chunks of raw meat and threw them through a slot in the cage. Kraithus immediately moved toward the food, but then stopped and looked at Jake. The creature made that soft, rumbling sound again and gestured with one of its clawed hands toward the meat. "It wants you to eat first," Dr. Zellman observed with amazement. "This behavior is completely unprecedented." Mortani creatures are supposed to be solitary hunters that show no social instincts whatsoever. Jake understood what was happening even if the Zephyrians did not. Kraithus was offering to share its food with him. This was not the behavior of a mindless beast, but of an intelligent being showing gratitude and respect. The creature recognized that Jake had helped it and wanted to return the favor. "I appreciate the offer," Jake said to Kraithus, "but that food is for you. You need to eat to get your strength back." The creature tilted its massive head and made a questioning sound. Then it picked up a smaller piece of meat and held it out toward Jake through the bars. The gesture was unmistakably an offer to share. Jake looked at the raw meat and his stomach turned. Human digestive systems were not designed to handle uncooked alien protein. But he could see that refusing the gift would hurt Kraithus' feelings and damage the trust they had built. So he took the meat and pretended to take a small bite before hiding it in his medical bag. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "That's very kind of you." Kraithus made a happy rumbling sound and began eating its own meal with much more enthusiasm than it had shown in weeks. Jake watched the creature feed and realized that something fundamental had changed between them. They were no longer predator and prey. They had become something like friends. Commander Vextara was not pleased with this development. "Enough of this nonsense. Guards, open the cage door. It is time for our entertainment to begin." "Wait," Jake said quickly. "The creature needs more time to digest its food. If you put me in there now, while it's full and sleepy, there won't be much of a fight." The commander considered this and nodded reluctantly. "Very well, we will wait 2 hours for digestion. But then you go into that cage regardless of any other excuses you might invent?" Jake used those 2 hours to continue observing Kraithus and learning more about its behavior. The creature seemed to be trying to communicate with him using gestures and different types of sounds. It pointed to its bandaged wounds and made soft noises that seemed to express gratitude. It also kept offering Jake pieces of its food even, though he politely declined each time. Most interesting of all, Kraithus began demonstrating what looked like protective behavior. When the Zephyrian guards came too close to Jake, the creature would position itself between them and make warning growls. It was acting like Jake was part of its pack or family group. "This is impossible," Dr. Zellman muttered as he reviewed his data. "Mortani physiology should not allow for this type of social bonding. Their brain structure is designed for solitary hunting and territorial aggression." "Maybe your understanding of their brain structure is incomplete," Jake suggested. "Just because something is a predator doesn't mean it can't form relationships with other species." Commander Vextara had heard enough discussion. "Time is up," she announced. "Open the cage. Let us see if your new friendship can protect you from those claws and teeth." The guards moved toward the cage door controls, but Kraithus suddenly stood up and moved to block the entrance. The creature was clearly positioning itself to protect Jake from being forced inside. Its protective instincts had completely overridden its supposed nature as a mindless killing machine. Jake realized that the next few minutes would determine whether he lived or died. But more importantly, they would show the Zephyrians that their assumptions about other species were dangerously wrong. Sometimes the greatest strength came not from violence and domination, but from compassion and understanding between very different kinds of beings. The cage door slid open with a mechanical hiss, but Jake did not move toward it. Kraithus was standing directly in the doorway, making it impossible for anyone to enter or exit. The massive creature's red eyes were fixed on the Zephyrian guards, and its claws were extended in a clear threat display. "Move the beast aside," Commander Vextara ordered her soldiers. "Use the shock prods if necessary." 2 guards approached the cage carrying long metal rods that crackled with electrical energy. But when they got within reach of Kraithus, the creature did something unexpected. Instead of attacking them or retreating from the pain, it began making a series of complex sounds that were unlike anything it had produced before. "What is it doing?" the commander demanded. Dr. Zellman was frantically checking his instruments and his face had gone pale. "Commander, I think it's speaking. These vocalizations match patterns from our xenolinguistics database." "It's using what?" "Appears to be an ancient Mortani dialect," That's impossible. Mortani are mindless predators. They don't have language. Apparently our intelligence reports were wrong, the science officer replied nervously. This creature is definitely attempting to communicate with us. Jake could not understand the words, but he could tell from Kraithus' tone and body language that it was making some kind of declaration or demand. The creature kept gesturing toward him with one clawed hand while maintaining its protective stance in the doorway. Commander Vexthara looked frustrated and confused. Can you translate what it's saying? Dr. Zelman worked at his computer for several minutes before answering. It's difficult because this dialect is very old, but I think it's claiming protective custody over the human. It's invoking something called the Honor Guard Protocol. What does that mean? I'm not entirely sure. The translation software suggests it's some kind of formal protection agreement between warriors. The creature is declaring that harming the human would be equivalent to attacking its own territory or family group. Jake felt a surge of hope. Kraithus was not just protecting him on instinct. It was using formal legal concepts from its own culture to shield him from harm. This implied a level of sophisticated thinking that completely contradicted everything the Zephyrians believed about Mortani intelligence. This changes nothing, Commander Vexthara said angrily. Beast or not, it is our prisoner and will do as we command. Increase the power on the shock prods and force it to move. But before the guards could follow this order, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Red warning lights flashed and an automated voice announced an emergency in the Zephyrian language. Commander Vexthara touched a communication device on her wrist and spoke rapidly with someone on the bridge. Her expression changed from annoyance to genuine concern. We have a problem, she told her officers. Long-range sensors have detected an unidentified fleet approaching our position. Ships of unknown design but massive energy signatures? Could it be an Earth Defense Corps rescue mission? Dr. Zelman asked. No, these vessels are too large and their technology readings don't match human capabilities. They appear to be organic rather than mechanical in construction. Jake noticed that Kraithus had stopped making protective sounds and was now listening intently to the conversation. The creature's body language had changed from defensive to alert, as if it recognized something important in what the Zephyrians were saying. How long until they reach us? Commander Vexthara asked through her communicator. 30 minutes at their current speed, came the reply from the bridge. Commander, there's something else. They're broadcasting a signal in what our computers identify as ancient Mortani language. The color drained from the commander's face. Show me the translation immediately. A holographic display appeared in the air, showing text in both alien script and Zephyrian translation. Jake could not read either language, but he could see that the message was short and seemed to be some kind of ultimatum based on its tone. They're demanding the return of someone called Kraithus, Dr. Zelman read aloud. They say we have 1 hour to surrender him unharmed, or they will consider it an act of war against the Mortani Confederation. The Mortani Confederation was destroyed centuries ago, Commander Vexthara protested. They're supposed to be extinct. Apparently not, the science officer replied grimly. These ships are definitely of Mortani origin, and they seem to know exactly what we have aboard our vessel. Jake looked at Kraithus and saw something that might have been satisfaction in the creature's glowing eyes. The beast had been captured and tortured for weeks, but it had never given up hope of rescue. Somehow its people had tracked him down and come to bring him home. What are your orders, Commander? One of the officers asked nervously. Vexthara paced back and forth in front of the cage while her mind worked through the options. We cannot simply surrender our most valuable prisoner. The beast is worth a fortune to the Imperial Research Division, but we also cannot fight an entire Mortani fleet with a single warship. Perhaps we could negotiate, Dr. Zelman suggested. Offer to trade the creature for safe passage and compensation. The Mortani don't negotiate, the commander snapped. They're famous for their honor codes and absolute responses to threats. If they say they'll start a war over this creature, they mean it. Jake realized this was his chance to save not just himself, but potentially prevent a much larger conflict. Commander, maybe I can help with this situation. All the Zephyrians turned to stare at him. What could you possibly do, human? Kraithus trusts me. He might be willing to communicate through me as an intermediary. If his people know that he's been treated well and cared for, they might be more reasonable about negotiating his release. Commander Vexthora laughed bitterly. Treated well? We've kept it in a cage and used it for entertainment. But I've been healing his injuries and he's responded positively to that care. His people will be able to see that he's in better condition now than when you first captured him. Dr. Zellman nodded thoughtfully. The human has a point. The creature's health readings have improved dramatically in the last day. If the Mortani scan him, they'll detect that he's been receiving medical treatment. And what do you want in return for this help? The commander asked Jake suspiciously. Safe passage for me and all the other prisoners you took from the refugee camp, plus a guarantee that you'll stop raiding civilian settlements. Absolutely not. You're in no position to make demands. Kraithus suddenly roared so loudly that it shook the walls of the room. The creature was glaring at Commander Vexthara with obvious hostility. It seemed to understand that she was threatening Jake and was expressing its displeasure in no uncertain terms. 20 minutes until the Mortani fleet arrives. The bridge reported through the communication system. Commander Vexthara looked at the massive creature blocking the cage door, then at Jake, then at her nervous officers. The approaching ships represented a threat that could destroy her vessel and kill everyone aboard. But surrendering valuable prisoners went against everything the Zephyrian Empire stood for. Fine, she said finally. You will act as our intermediary with the beast and its people. But if you try any tricks or if this negotiation fails, I will personally throw you into space without a suit. Jake nodded and walked closer to the cage. Kraithus stepped aside to let him enter but kept its massive body positioned between Jake and the Zephyrian guards. The creature was making it clear that it would protect its human friend no matter what happened next. Well, Kraithus, Jake said softly, it looks like your family is coming to get you. Let's see if we can all get out of this alive. The Mortani ships appeared on the main viewing screen like massive living creatures swimming through space. Jake had never seen anything like them before. Instead of metal hulls and mechanical engines, these vessels seemed to be grown rather than built. Their surfaces pulsed with organic rhythms and glowed with bioluminescent patterns that shifted and changed like breathing. Incoming transmission, the bridge officer announced through the communication system. Commander Vexthara activated the main display, and suddenly the room was filled with the image of an enormous Mortani warrior. This creature was even larger than Kraithus and wore what appeared to be living armor that moved and shifted across its body. Its eyes glowed with the same red light, but they held an intelligence and authority that made Jake's breath catch in his throat. I am War Leader Thakmer of the First Hunt Fleet, the alien said in perfect Zephyrian language. You hold one of our people prisoner. You will return him immediately or face the consequences of your actions. War Leader Thakmer, Commander Vexthara replied with forced politeness. I am Commander Vexthara of the Imperial Navy. The creature you refer to was captured during a legitimate military operation after it attacked and destroyed one of our colonies. Kraithus was defending refugees who had sought sanctuary on that world, the Mortani leader corrected coldly. Your forces were massacring civilians, and he acted to protect the innocent. This is not a crime under the laws of war. Jake noticed that Kraithus had moved closer to the viewing screen and was making soft sounds of recognition. The massive creature was clearly happy to see its leader and fellow warriors, but it did not try to call out or demand immediate rescue. Instead, it seemed to be waiting for something. The creature killed 300 of our soldiers, Commander Vexthara protested. It cannot simply be released without consequences. Those soldiers died in honorable combat while pursuing dishonorable objectives, War Leader Thakmer replied. Their deaths are unfortunate but justified. Now return our kinsmen before we are forced to take more direct action. The Zephyrian commander looked desperate. 300 soldiers had died capturing Kraithus, and now she was being ordered to simply give him back. Her career and possibly her life would be forfeit if she returned to the Empire empty-handed. Perhaps we can reach some kind of agreement, she suggested. The creature has been well cared for during its imprisonment. We have provided food and medical attention. War Leader Thakmer's expression darkened. Medical attention. You mean treating wounds that you inflicted through torture and neglect? That's not true, Dr. Zellman interrupted before the commander could respond. The creature's medical care was provided by a human prisoner. He has spent the last day treating infections and injuries that were indeed neglected since the initial capture. The Mortani leader's glowing eyes shifted to focus on Jake. A human provided healing to Krakthus. This is unexpected. Show me this human healer. Commander Vextara gestured reluctantly toward Jake, who stepped forward where the viewing screen could see him clearly. War Leader Thakmer studied him intently for several long moments before speaking again. Human, is it true that you have been caring for our kinsman? Yes, sir, Jake replied respectfully. I'm a combat medic with the Earth Defense Corps. I treated his wounds and infections as best I could with limited supplies. Why would you provide aid to a creature that your captors intended to use against you? Jake thought carefully about his answer. Because he was hurt and needed medical attention. I'm a healer. It's what I do regardless of who the patient is. Krakthus suddenly began speaking in the ancient Mortani language, making the same complex sounds that he had used earlier. He gestured toward Jake several times, and his tone seemed urgent and explanatory. War Leader Thakmer listened to the entire speech before responding in the same language. The conversation continued for several minutes while the Zephyrians waited nervously. Finally, the Mortani leader switched back to speaking in a language everyone could understand. Krakthus tells me that you not only treated his physical injuries, but showed him respect and kindness when you could have simply allowed him to suffer. He says you shared your food and water even though you had very little for yourself. He offered to share his food with me first, Jake said honestly. I was just returning the gesture. He also tells me that you protected him from additional abuse by convincing your captors to allow proper medical treatment. Is this accurate? Jake glanced at Commander Vextara, who was glaring at him with obvious hostility. I suggested that a healthy prisoner would provide better entertainment than a sick one. I was trying to help him without making the situation worse for either of us. War Leader Thakmer made a sound that might have been laughter. Clever. You used the enemy's cruelty against them to provide aid to our kinsmen. This shows wisdom as well as compassion. What does any of this matter? Commander Vextara demanded impatiently. Will you accept terms for the creature's release or not? The terms have already been set, the Mortani leader replied. But they have changed based on new information. Krakthus has invoked the Honor Guard protocol on behalf of the human healer. This makes him part of our family group under ancient law. Dr. Zellman quickly consulted his translation database. Commander, the Honor Guard protocol is apparently a formal adoption ceremony? It means the creature has legally claimed the human as a protected relative. That's impossible, Vextara protested. Humans and Mortani are completely different species. Species is irrelevant under our laws, War Leader Thakmer explained. Honor and courage are what define family bonds. The human showed both when he risked his own safety to care for Krakthus. Therefore, he is now under our protection. Jake felt overwhelmed by this unexpected development. He had simply done his job as a medic, but somehow this had resulted in him being adopted by an alien warrior culture. What does that mean exactly? It means that any harm to you will be considered an attack on the Mortani Confederation itself, the war leader answered. It also means that you are entitled to all the rights and protections of a Mortani citizen, including safe passage and warrior status. Commander Vextara realized that her situation had become much worse. Not only was she losing her valuable prisoner, but now the Mortani were claiming legal authority over one of her other captives as well. This is completely unacceptable. The human is our prisoner and will remain so. War Leader Thakmer's image seemed to grow larger and more threatening on the screen. Commander, you have 30 seconds to release both Krakthus and his human kinsman, or we will board your vessel and take them by force. Choose wisely. The bridge of the Zephyrian ship erupted in panicked voices as sensors detected weapons powering up on the Mortani fleet. The organic ships were moving into attack formation and their bioluminescent patterns were shifting to aggressive configurations. Commander, they're targeting our engines and life support systems, the tactical officer reported. If they fire, we'll be disabled but not destroyed. Vexthara looked around at her frightened crew and realized she had no choice. Fighting the Mortani fleet would be suicide, and surrendering the prisoners was better than losing her entire ship and crew. Stand down weapons, she ordered reluctantly. Prepare to transfer the prisoners. Jake felt a mixture of relief and amazement as he realized he was actually going to survive this ordeal. But more than that, he had apparently gained an entire alien civilization as his extended family. When the Mortani transport beam surrounded him and Krakthus with golden light, he knew his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. The last thing he saw before the teleportation completed was Commander Vexthara's expression of furious defeat. She had learned too late that sometimes the greatest weapons were not guns or ships, but simple acts of kindness between different species. Jake Martinez, a humble combat medic, had just changed the balance of power in the galaxy by doing nothing more than his job with compassion and skill. In the universe of warfare and conquest, healing had proved to be the most powerful force of all.